Anyone? Yes, sir. Right here.
I just had a question. I've noticed, and this has happened to me too. A lot of people when they see things around them in the real world, they can sort of shut it off and desensitize it. But whenever they see it happening in the fictional world, it hits them so much more. Like I can read in the news, and I'm like, oh, that's sad, and then I play Undertale, and the skeleton's sad, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and it breaks the world. And I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on how we develop this greater empathy for things that I love them, but they're not real. You know what I mean? And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Some has to do with presentation. So much of the news is impersonal. Numbers, words, or names, they go by, and they're impersonal in so many ways. And you see, so-and-so was murdered. You don't know things about that person. Fictional character was murdered. You know something about that fictional character. You don't know about that person that you're reading about. If you were reading a story about someone you have known in your own life, you would react differently. That fictional character is in your life because you've invited them into your head. You've invited them into your feelings.
And you can oftentimes read their thoughts and feelings because you have this omniscient narrator or a thought bubble or something that has led you into this person's private life. And and when the pain happens, that's permeating into the next scene, as opposed to someone saying, "And now sports."
I also think that there's something that is safer about letting our feelings out with fiction. Maybe we're more likely to be open and vulnerable when we're reading a book or watching a TV show, because it somehow feels like it's okay if we get connected with these characters. Even if we lose one of them, it's not real in a lot of ways. And in doing so, we actually connect, we allow our heart to be open, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in that very necessary kind of connection that we need to form with our loved ones. In the real world, there's so many tragedies that are happening on a daily basis that sometimes we might become so overwhelmed, and this phenomenon of empathic distress might occur. Empathic distress means that we might become so burnt out on empathy that we might shut down and have a hard time having empathy for other events. And therefore, when we hear about yet another tragedy happening, it might be too painful and too difficult to connect. So as a way of self-preservation, we might shut down.
There's also a thing, and this comes from an old acting background of mine, which I do not do anymore, but one of the things that we talked about in class a lot was that when you're having a discussion about something that's really difficult to talk about, it's very often difficult to look into someone's eyes. However, when you're acting, when you're performing, you have to do that, and that's a much stronger choice, to look at someone in the eye, to feel all this emotion when someone's staring directly at you. When you're watching this on TV, you're watching actors do this, and you're watching them very much connect to a character if they're doing it right. And so you're seeing all these things that somebody who's actually telling you the story might hide or dart away from you. So you're getting that much closer connection. And Janina's talked about it a number of times with video games and online bullying, where it's very easy to speak to people in a negative way when you can't look in their eyes.
Also, real life demands something of us that television and film doesn't. I mean, once you're confronted with something that happens in real life, or you see something, or even just being aware of it, your mind works very quickly, I think, and says, okay, well, if I know about this, then what do I do? Uh-oh. And it's going to cost us. And not that you don't want to. Everybody in here, we obviously all have empathy, or you wouldn't love this genre, you wouldn't be here at this particular panel especially. But then our old tapes come in, and what did our parents say, and what did we learn about ourselves that isn't true? What are the falsehoods that we base our view of ourselves on? You know, am I enough? Will I know what to say? How do I approach this? Who am I to give in this circumstance? How do I know I could add anything or help at all? I better just not. You know, and that all happens very quickly, and we can shut down, you know? Being aware of all of those voices and lies is a really important thing to do, so that we can know our own heroism, so that we can be those people to stand up and shut down the lies and go, I'm Superman. Thank you very much, you know?
I'll just add to that. That the day that I landed, I got the news, the terrible news about my dad. I landed in Toronto, my hometown, where my father was killed. And as I'm I'm sort of in a, at the time, I'm almost numb. But I pass by and there's 3 newspaper boxes, the 3 main newspapers of Toronto, and because it's such a peaceful place, it's Canada, and handgun murders especially are very rare. My father's murder was the front page of each of those things. And it just, my reaction was rage. My reaction was to go over and actually kick the newspaper box. How dare you, I invade my privacy like that. But upon reflection later on, I realized how many times had I walked by a newspaper box and seen murder, and seen that there was somebody killed, and thought nothing or just shoved it out. Since that day, I've made it a point, maybe at risk of my serenity, to stop. And if I see a story where somebody's been hurt or murdered, just go there and try to imagine what the family might be going through. Because this stuff does happen. We have fiction, and it's a safe place for us to act out, our own intentions, what we hope we do, but then there's a real life going on out there, and some bad stuff does happen, a lot of good stuff happens. But it's increased my empathy to the world, and I just, not to toot my own horn, but I try to do something good as often as possible, if not on a, I'd love it to be a daily basis, and I do try to do a kindness of some kind every day. I also make sure I donate a certain amount of my income to charity. So in some ways, the awful thing that happened to my family woke me up, and I refuse to allow myself to be anesthetized again to the suffering of other people. So I'll just say it. It's, as I say, as we've all been saying, in fiction, it's a safe way to identify and hope we do the heroic thing. And the challenge, though, for me has been to try to do something, even moderately or minutely heroic in my life. And I hope we all find at least a moment like that in our life to do something like that. So anyway, that's it.
And sometimes it can take a lot of work to resensitize yourself to things you've numb to or learn to ignore. And sometimes it's simply a matter of making a decision. I'm not going to let myself be numb. When I was younger, there were points where I was just so alert to how other people were feeling, it got overwhelming. And it reached a point where it's like I had this empathic stress and stopped and numbed myself in a lot of ways. And I still remember the point. It's like having a conversation with myself in the mirror about that. And it's just that to them, it's like I stopped ignoring it. And it got a little bit overwhelming again, but I was not going to go back to that place of being numb to those other feelings. And I remember describing this to a friend, and I think she thought I was talking about being psychic. And because she also then got to noticing how much I noticed on people's feelings and noticed things that they weren't. And so, this is also a story I've never told. But just back to my point, sometimes you just make the decision, I'm not going to ignore that, and sometimes you have to remind yourself you made that decision, but it can work.
Maurice, you said so many beautiful things. One that stuck out in my mind is at risk to my serenity. It's really brave, it's really scary to step in and have empathy and do the things that we need to do in the world. It is. I can completely relate. But, once you do, you realize, I'm really living here. Your lows will be lower, but your highs will be higher, and you'll bring other people into places of healing that can be really wonderful. Really hard, but really good, right?
Yeah, it definitely has been worthwhile. And because you've got to, there's always a choice, I feel. One has to look for what good can I extract from any given tragedy. There's got to be something here to learn, to pass on, and so that's what in my life anyway, in my story, I forced myself to do. Just lean into whatever the good is. What's the good I can do here? I hope there was some good in my revealing that, because I'm a youngster. I'm comedy. I'm cartoons, and I'm silly, but there's also a live human being here, so that's okay with you. Thank you.
So in a way, you're kind of Batman?
Yeah, except for the billionaire fighting crime part.
Nobody needs to know that.
However, actually, I will tell you just a very quick story. One day in 1992, in April, I was driving south on, I won't say, because actually I've always been afraid of reprisals for this. I was driving and I heard three pops. Over to my left, I saw what looked to be a plainclothes officer firing at three figures who were disappearing into a car with what looked like bags. And this was at the Bank of America. And I thought to myself, oh my God, that bank just got robbed. And the little voice in my head said, keep driving, it's none of your business. Another voice in my head said, you got to do something. So I turned left at the next intersection, and these guys had come south down the alleyway. And I found myself behind their car. I knew it was their car because the window had been shot out. I followed them for a block. They turned right down a side street, and they pulled over behind a van, and the three youths, the three youths piled out of that car and got into the van. Now, this was before flip phones, cell phones, all that, but I did have a car phone. I had one of those built-in car phones. That's how long ago it was. But I had shut off the service because I couldn't afford it anymore. So I kept trying to hit 911. Couldn't get them. And I saw, 5 minutes, I took down their license plate number, but I didn't want to write it down because they were looking out the back window of the van at me. So I started reciting the license number of the van. I can tell it to you to this day, but I won't because, again, fear of reprisals. They turned left. I went right and went back to the bank, reciting. And I pulled in and I said, I saw them. I saw what they did. I saw the van they got into. You take down this license. I said, this is the first cop. They whisked me into the bank. I sat down with the FBI. The FBI, I think they might have thought I was an accomplice. But I gave them the license plate number, and while the guy's drilling me, his assistant came in and said, we've got them. They're hiding under a house. And he turned to me and he said, well, Mr. La Marche, it seems you're a hero. Thank you very much, it just helped. So we went to trial and they showed me these guys, and the robbery they'd done before, the youth that I was going to testify against actually had his gun to the head of a woman that was on her knees in the last bank that they had robbed before this one. And they were a gang that was doing these bank robberies. And all I can think of is, at the time I thought, you've got to do something because there was one guy that came forward and helped the murderer of my father get caught. You've got to honor that by coming forward and doing something. So I came forward, and I'd like to think that maybe I prevented something from happening further down the line. Anyway, it really went away for 10 years. And that's my little superhero story. I've never told the public a handful of people who know that story. And I don't say it to aggrandize myself, but it's that thing of you've got to do good where you can find an opportunity to do good. And if you find yourself in a moment to do that, it's a turning point.
Our friend Matt Langdon, who gives a lot of talks on how to find heroism in everyday people, he says the opposite of a hero is not a villain, it's a bystander. And you have to, sometimes it helps to mentally rehearse doing the right thing so you're ready to do these. I think it goes back to the fiction we've been talking about. Some of it vicariously lets us mentally rehearse taking those steps and not being the bystander.
Matt's our partner in Pop Culture Hero Coalition, and he's one of the co-founders, and he says studies show that listening and watching heroism on screen is actually a precursor to doing real-life heroism. It's a studied fact.